Hello, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jessica here from the Women's Center. I'm honored to be joined today with Julia Rose Sutherland, one of our artists in residence. We're gearing up to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, and I wanted to connect with Julia to discuss her art practice and some of the issues facing Indigenous women today. Hello, Julia. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Jessica. I'm thrilled to be here to talk about my work and Indigenous feminism from my standpoint.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. So let me step back and jump right into the questions. For those who may have missed it, can you briefly introduce yourself and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Julia Rose Sutherland. I'm a half settler, half Mi'kmaq woman, a member of the Mi'kmaq Medipinajaan Nation in New Brunswick, Red Bank. I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I make work from sculpture, textiles, text work, and performance, as well as photography. I completed my BFA here in Calgary, Alberta, on Miniska at the Alberta College of Art and Design, now AU Arts. And I have an MFA from the University of Buffalo in the USA. And I've participated in residencies here in Calgary and abroad, in China, France, and in the USA. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. I know the Women's Center is very honored to have you as an artist in residence right now as well.
Thank you so much.
What do you wish more people knew about your art practice?
I think that the social engagement aspect of it, as well as my social justice practice and research practice. I think a lot of the times when we view visual art, we think about material research, we think about narratives for sure and aesthetics, but sometimes people forget about the research aspect. And then for me, essentially ingrained in my practice is one that's based on my family's knowledge, my quest of finding knowledge and learning my history, and especially my advocacy work, especially to do with Indigenous and Two-Spirited peoples of Canada and North America. So for me, I think a big thing is to kind of step away from aesthetics sometimes and have dialogue. Research and dialogue 100% are the biggest part of my practice and what I like to showcase the most.
Mm-hmm. So you touch on your advocacy work. To go along with that, what do you wish more people knew about Indigenous issues?
Absolutely. I mean, I think for me, I've had some very interesting conversations. I mean, right now we're dealing with, of course, Black Lives Matter, and it's come to the forefront in a really strong way. And I think that is so important. And I think for me to think about Indigenous issues, to think about colonial issues, and it doesn't end just with Indigenous people or the Black community or people of color. It actually deals with every single person. We live in a colonial, post-colonial society that's been ingrained in us, and it's a systematic placement that we can't really hide behind. We can't say we don't have anything to do with it, because every single day with every single one of our actions and everything we do affects this. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important for us to remember that colonial violence and genocide is still ongoing. And we look at Alberta, we live in Calgary, Alberta right now, and I'm looking at Bill 1, which is just being pushed through right now. And it is so heartbreaking to see people to be apathetic about it or not to think about it, because their actions of not stepping up and saying something or not having these tough conversations is really difficult for me to see and to deal with, because it is colonial violence. To be silent is to be part of that violence. So I think for me, when I'm thinking about issues that affect Indigenous people in particular, that's what I see, is other people not engaging in the world around them. And I hope, that changes. And I hope that in this very moment of unsettling, that people learn that to be uncomfortable is a really big step, and it's really important. I find that people don't want to have these difficult conversations. And I even feel that within my family. I had a terrible Facebook drama conversation about Indigenous rights just yesterday. And at first I was so angry and I was upset. And then I thought, stewing in what's uncomfortable for just a moment is really important, because I think it opens up a lot of avenues and starts a lot of conversations. It's like a wound or a fissure that needs to be healed. And I think it's really important to have those those scars and to think about it that way, especially for, you know, a settler population, and myself too, as a passing white woman. I'm a half settler too, and I identify in that heritage as well. But I also acknowledge the privilege that I see in myself because of my fair skin. And it's maybe not as seen as well. So for me, that's a huge thing. And, you know, I think it's important, especially with Indigenous issues, that, you know, when you're out and about and looking at things, to think about perspective, and to really shift your perspective sometimes. You know, we don't know everything, and we're always constantly learning and trying to better ourselves, whether it's through our language, whether it's through the way that we carry ourselves, whether it's through the conversations we have with our family or strangers or people on the street. But it'll only get better if you do the work.
Mm-hmm.
So for Indigenous issues in general, for, you know, the Canadian population, North American population, and population of the world, it's to just do the work and sit and be uncomfortable. That's very important.
Yeah, thank you for that point, for sure. And to go along with that, actually, I'll jump into the next one then. If you can describe some of the barriers you may have experienced to your artistic practice, and maybe how organizations and even individuals can better make space for Indigenous voices.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm very privileged. I mean, I got to go and I did an amazing undergrad here at AU Arts, and I got to go to an amazing research institution, UB. But still within those institutions that I studied in, or even institutions that I've been in, for residencies, participating in making art and other avenues, it has been a lot of lack of information on other people's part, you know, and going into a situation and having to educate other people about something, which is not something, I mean, I think it's draining and exhausting in a lot of ways for me to have, you know, it's always the BIPOC person that has to like take the brunt of the work and like really bring it up and talk about it. For me, I really enjoy that kind of advocacy work, and I really enjoy those kind of conversations, and my practice is built on that. But for sure, it's like resources that deal with alternative spirituality, you know, or alternative methods of education, or, you know, just talking about the ideas of trauma and sublimation, and how rooted that is in systems of, whether it's education or whether it's, you know, political, or it's, you know, our governmental systems. It's really deep rooted. So there is a lot of lack of resources in that kind of stuff. But also it's also based in community, or feeling that there's other people there to be with you. And I know I'm off reserve, you know, which is not something I really enjoy to say, because I feel like I'm still very much a member of my community, and very connected to my community. But it's also different because I can't be with my family and my elders all the time. You know, it's amazing we're in this digital world where, like, Chief Bill Ward of my nation does Facebook videos for every meeting, you know, and every time we have a discussion, like, so we can meet on Facebook or Skype or Zoom and have these discussions virtually. But it's not quite the same as like being with people. So that is a barrier of just community-based education. And of course, because not all education is based on sitting in a classroom reading or learning from a book. So those are definitely barriers too. And for me, like, learning my heritage, or going back into my heritage and traditions, has not always been very easy. You know, my mother didn't have the chance to really embrace her culture, and my grandma has, to a point, you know, but she left home when she was fairly young. And so she doesn't feel maybe as connected as she wants to be. So I find that's a hurdle too. It's like, find that connection. And I feel extremely privileged and lucky that I can do that, and I can dive into these things and do this research. But it is a barrier because it's a different kind of research. You know, it's a primary research, which as artists, we know all about primary research, is like doing it, material, like being in it, but not everyone thinks about research in that kind of way. So I think that, yeah, it's a perspective of research is a barrier. Yeah, and community engagement sometimes can be a barrier, and basic resources too.
Yeah. So you've spoken quite a bit about your art practice as a way to inform and educate. And you had touched a bit on healing as well. And I know a lot of people associate expressing themselves creatively as a way to heal themselves. What would you say to someone looking for a platform to express themselves creatively?
I would say find anything and everything you can do. I think the biggest thing when it comes to like a creative endeavor or to find a way to release something or to talk about things, is to just dive into like, what do you really enjoy? You know what I mean? It could be something like someone's a ceramicist and they're like, oh, I'm going to try painting. It might not be their wheelhouse, but what is it really that you enjoy and what is it you're trying to say? And then sometimes, the medium doesn't really matter. So I think it's important for anyone, but I also think that, engaging in communal creative practices is a really great way to start too. Whether you're in a stitch and bitch circle with a bunch of friends, whether you're collaging and using repurposed materials, whether you're doing like paint nights, which people are like, oh, it's like gimmicky, but it's not. It's a beautiful communal way to create and talk about things and feel like you're allowed to make mistakes. You don't always have to do this creative process alone, far away by yourself, secluded. I think, engaging in community creative projects are a really great way to connect with people. And I know it's hard. We're in the middle of a pandemic, but it is really important to connect with people when you're looking at art too, and to look at other art, So I think it's really important. But I hope more people, I know during this time, more people are doing creative things. And I'm loving that, like taking time from themselves, a break with like this capitalistic society in which we're nested in, to think about what do you enjoy, what do you need? And, it doesn't have to be, art making either. Writing, journaling. My sister has recently got into poetry and she's part of this great poetry group. And she loves doing this and talking about her feelings, going back into it, diving into it. I think it's really important to do, and to do it for yourself too, and without expectation of, mastery, which I think is outdated.
Yeah, I love that idea too of just going for it, and I think too the community building around that as well, and I think it's also a good way to find community too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just wanted to wrap up. I didn't want to take too much of your time today, but is there anything that we maybe missed that you wanted to discuss with us?
I think right now I want to really impose on people to think about, again, stewing with themselves and uncomfortableness, and to take time to be alone with yourself and these thoughts and feelings of everything going around. And, taking the time to really have deep discussions. For me, this is something I'm really coming into, and especially right now with everything happening with protesting and all these things, and, Bill 1, to think about what our priorities are and how do we serve ourselves and how do we serve our community and how do we stand up for people, and not in a performative way, but in a real way, which starts at home, which starts with ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today, Julia.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessica. I'm thrilled to be part of the Women's Center.
Yeah, and we look forward to when we can actually connect in person again.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks so much.